COVID-19 drug repurposing research. Drug repositioning, also known as drug repurposing, reprofiling, retasking, or therapeutic switching, is the repurposing of an approved drug for the treatment of a different disease or medical condition. This is one line of scientific research which is being pursued to develop safe and effective COVID-19 treatments. Other research directions include the development of a COVID-19 vaccine and convalescent plasma transfusion. Several existing antiviral medications, previously developed or used as treatments for severe acute respiratory syndrome SARS, Middle East respiratory syndrome MERS, HIV/AIDS, and malaria, have been researched as potential COVID-19 treatments, with some moving into clinical trials. In a statement to the journal Nature Biotechnology in February 2020, U.S. National Institutes of Health Viral Ecology Unit Chief Vincent Munster said, "The general genomic layout and the general replication kinetics and the biology of the MERS, SARS, and SARS-CoV-2 viruses are very similar, so testing drugs, which target relatively generic background outbreaks of novel emerging infections such as COVID-19 pose unique challenges to discover treatments appropriate for clinical use, given the small amount of time available for drug discovery. Since the process of developing and licensing a new drug for COVID-19 was expected to pose a particularly long delay, researchers have been probing the existing compendium of approved antivirals and other drugs as a cost-effective strategy in the meantime. One approach used in repositioning is to look for drugs that act through virus-related targets such as the RNA genome, i.e. remdesivir. Another approach concerns drugs acting through polypeptide packing, i.e. Lopinavir. Monoclonal antibodies. Monoclonal antibodies under investigation for repurposing include anti-L-6 agents Tocilizumab and anti-L-8 BM-986,253. This is in parallel to novel monoclonal antibody drugs developed specifically for COVID-19. Mavrilimumab is a human monoclonal antibody that inhibits human granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor receptor GM-CSF-R. It has been studied to see if it can improve the prognosis for patients with COVID-19 pneumonia and systemic hyperinflammation. One small study indicated some beneficial effects of treatment with mavrilimumab compared with those who were not. In January 2021, the UK National Health Service issued guidance that the immune-modulating drugs Tocilizumab and Saralimumab were beneficial when given promptly to people with COVID-19 admitted to intensive care, following research which found a reduction in the risk of death by 24%. Tocilizumab. Tocilizumab is an interleukin-6 inhibitor authorized for use in several conditions, including rheumatoid arthritis, giant cell arteritis, systemic juvenile idiopathic arthritis, and severe cytokine release syndrome. Its use has been studied in a number of trials. Hoffmann La Roche and the WHO have run separate trials in severe cases. Roche announced on July 29, 2020, that its randomized double-blind trial of Tocilizumab for the treatment of pneumonia in COVID patients had shown no benefits. The REMAP-CAB study in the UK found that Tocilizumab was beneficial in adults with severe COVID-19 who were critically ill and receiving respiratory or cardiovascular organ support in an intensive care setting, when this was started within 24 hours of the need for organ support. The use of Tocilizumab and its place in therapy have been updated by UK NICE in January 2021. It has been part of the large recovery trial in the UK. The published results have been reviewed as the most definitive evidence addressing the controversy over whether Tocilizumab should be included in treatment for severely ill patients with COVID-19. Over 4,000 adults were randomly assigned to Tocilizumab or usual care, several times more than the total in previous randomized trials, and most patients received systemic corticosteroids. Mortality within 28 days was 31% in patients allocated to Tocilizumab and 35% in those receiving usual care, rate ratio 0*85. Discharge from the hospital within 28 days was also more likely. In June 2021, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration (FDA) issued an emergency use authorization (EUA) for Tocilizumab for the treatment of COVID-19 in hospitalized people aged 2 years of age and older who are receiving non-invasive or invasive mechanical ventilation or extracorporeal membrane oxygenation (ECMO). As of August 2021, the European Medicines Agency (EMA) is evaluating Tocilizumab to extend its use to include treatment of hospitalized adults with severe COVID-19 who are already receiving treatment with corticosteroids. Antivirals, virals. Favipiravir. Favipiravir is an antiviral drug approved for the treatment of influenza in Japan. There is limited evidence suggesting that, compared to other antiviral drugs, favipiravir might improve outcomes for people with COVID-19, but more rigorous studies are needed before any conclusions can be drawn. Chinese clinical trials in Wuhan and Shenzhen claimed to show that favipiravir was clearly effective. Of 35 patients in Shenzhen tested negative in a median of 4 days, while the length of illness was 11 days in the 45 patients who did not receive it. In a study conducted in Wuhan on 240 patients with pneumonia, half were given favipiravir and half received Immunosuppressants. The researchers found that patients recovered from coughs and fevers faster when treated with favipiravir, but that there was no change in how many patients in each group progressed to more advanced stages of illness that required treatment with a ventilator. On 22 March 2020, Italy approved the drug for experimental use against COVID-19 and began conducting trials in the 3 regions most affected by the disease. The Italian pharmaceutical agency reminded the public that the existing evidence in support of the drug is scant and preliminary. On 30 May 2020, the Russian Health Ministry approved a generic version of favipiravir named Favipiravir, which proved highly effective in the first phase of clinical trials. In June 2020, India approved the use of a generic version of Favipiravir called Fabiflu, developed by Glenmark Pharmaceuticals, in the treatment of mild to moderate cases of COVID-19. On 26 May 2021, a systematic review found a 24% greater chance of clinical improvement when administered in the first 7 days of hospitalization, but no statistically significant reduction in mortality for any of the groups, including hospitalized patients and those with mild or moderate symptoms. Lopinavir/ritonavir. In March 2020, the main protease 3CL-Pro of the SARS-CoV-2 virus was identified as a target for post-infection drugs. The enzyme is essential for processing the replication-related polyprotein. To find the enzyme, scientists used the genome published by Chinese researchers in January 2020 to isolate the main protease. Protease inhibitors approved for treating human immunodeficiency viruses, HIV, Lopinavir, and ritonavir have preliminary evidence of activity against the coronaviruses, SARS and MERS. As a potential combination therapy, they are used together in 2-phase Roman III arms of the 2020 Global Solidarity Project on COVID-19. A preliminary study in China of combined Lopinavir and ritonavir found no effect in people hospitalized for COVID-19. One study of Lopinavir/ritonavir Calitra, a combination of the antivirals Lopinavir and ritonavir, concluded that no benefit was observed. The drugs were designed to inhibit HIV from replicating by binding to the protease. A team of researchers at the University of Colorado are trying to modify the drugs to find a compound that will bind with the protease of SARS-CoV-2. There are criticisms within the scientific community about directing resources to repurposing drugs specifically developed for HIV/AIDS because such drugs are unlikely to be effective against a virus lacking the SPO. Who included Lopinavir/ritonavir in the International Solidarity Trial. On 29 June, the chief investigators of the UK recovery trial reported that there was no clinical benefit from use of Lopinavir ritonavir in 1596 people hospitalized with severe COVID-19 infection of. A study published in October 2020. Remdesivir, antiparasitics. The idea of repurposing host-directed drugs for antiviral therapy has experienced a renaissance. In some cases, the research has highlighted fundamental limitations to their use for the treatment of acute RNA virus infections. Antiparasitics that have been investigated include chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, mefloquine, ivermectin, and antiviral. Chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. Ivermectin. Anticoagulants. Medications to prevent blood clotting have been suggested for treatment, and anticoagulant therapy with low molecular weight heparin appears to be associated with better outcomes in severe COVID-19 showing signs of coagulopathy elevated D-dimer. Several anticoagulants have been tested in Italy, with low molecular weight heparin being widely used to treat patients, prompting the Italian Medicines Agency to publish guidelines on its use. Scientists have identified an ability of heparin to bind to the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, neutralizing it, and proposed the drug as a possible antiviral. A multicenter study on 300 patients researching the use of enoxaparin sodium at prophylaxis and therapeutic dosages was announced in Italy on 14 April. The anticoagulant dipyridamole is proposed as a treatment for COVID-19, and a clinical trial is underway. Immunosuppressants. As of July 2021, the European Medicines Agency EMA is evaluating an application to extend the use of anakinra to include treatment of COVID-19 in adults with pneumonia who are at risk of developing severe respiratory. Interferons. Drugs with immune-modulating effects that may prove useful in COVID-19 treatment include type I interferons, such as interferon B, peginterferon alpha-2 and -2. IFNB1 have been shown in an open-label randomized controlled trial in combination with Lopinavir/ritonavir, Lancet 2020, 395 10,000, 238, 1695-1704 IFNB will be included in the International Solidarity Trial in combination with the HIV drugs Lopinavir and ritonavir, as well as the Remapsap. Finnish biotech firm Faron Pharmaceuticals continues to develop INF-beta for ARDS and is involved in worldwide initiatives against COVID-19, including the Solidarity Trial. UK biotech firm Synergen started conducting trials on IFNB, a drug that was originally developed to treat COPD. Steroids. Dexamethasone. Dexamethasone is a corticosteroid medication in use for multiple conditions such as rheumatic problems, skin diseases, asthma, and chronic obstructive lung disease, among others. A multi-center, randomized controlled trial of dexamethasone in treating acute respiratory distress syndrome ARDS, published in February 2020, showed reduced need for mechanical ventilation and mortality. Dexamethasone is only helpful in people requiring supplemental oxygen. Following an analysis of 7 randomized trials, the WHO recommends the use of systemic corticosteroids in guidelines for treatment of people with severe or critical illness, and that they not be used in people that do not meet the criteria for severe illness. On 16 June, the Oxford University Recovery Trial issued a press release announcing preliminary results that the drug could reduce deaths by about a third in participants on ventilators and by about a fifth in participants on oxygen. The researchers estimated that treating 8 patients on ventilators with dexamethasone saved 1 life, and treating 25 patients on oxygen saved 1 life. Several experts called for the full dataset to be published quickly to allow wider analysis of the results. A preprint was published on June 22, and the peer-reviewed article appeared on July 17. Based on those preliminary results, Dexamethasone treatment has been recommended by the U.S. National Institutes of Health (NIH) for patients with COVID-19 who are mechanically ventilated or who require supplemental oxygen but are not MUN. The NIH recommends against using dexamethasone in patients with COVID-19 who do not require supplemental oxygen. In July 2020, the World Health Organization, who stated they are in the process of updating treatment guidelines to include dexamethasone or other steroids. The Infectious Diseases Society of America ITSA guideline panel suggests the use of glucocorticoids for patients with severe COVID-19, where severe is defined as patients with oxygen saturation SpO2 equals 94% on room air, and those who require supplemental oxygen, mechanical ventilation, or extracorporeal membrane. The ITSA recommends against the use of glucocorticoids for those with COVID-19 without hypoxemia requiring supplemental oxygen. In July 2020, the European Medicines Agency EMA started reviewing results from the recovery study arm that involved the use of dexamethasone in the treatment of patients with COVID-19 admitted to the hospital to provide. It focused particularly on the potential use of the drug for the treatment of adults with COVID-19. In September 2020, the WHO released updated guidance on using corticosteroids for COVID-19. The WHO recommends systemic corticosteroids rather than no systemic corticosteroids for the treatment of people with severe and critical COVID-19. Strong recommendation based on moderate certainty evidence. The WHO suggests not to use corticosteroids in the treatment of people with non-severe COVID-19. Conditional recommendation based on low certainty evidence. In September 2020, the European Medicines Agency EMA endorsed the use of dexamethasone in adults and adolescents from 12 years of age and weighing at least 40 kilograms 88 lb who require supplemental oxygen therapy. Dexamethasone can be taken by mouth or given as an injection or infusion drip into a vein. Hydrocortisone. In September 2020, a meta-analysis published by the WHO Rapid Evidence Appraisal for COVID-19 Therapies REACT Working Group found hydrocortisone to be effective in reducing mortality rate of critically ill COVID-19. The use of corticosteroids can cause a severe and deadly hyperinfection syndrome for people with strong loidiasis, which may be an underlying condition in populations exposed to the parasite strongyloids, stercoralis. This risk can be mitigated by the presumptive use of Ivermectin before steroid treatment. Budesonide. Administration of this inhaled steroid early in the course of COVID-19 infection has been found to reduce the likelihood of needing urgent medical care and reduce the time to recovery. More studies are ongoing. In April 2021, budesonide was approved by authorities in the UK for off-label use to treat COVID-19 on a case-by-case basis. Others. Ciclisonide, an inhaled corticosteroid for asthma, was identified as a candidate antiviral in an in vitro drug screening assay done in South Korea. It has been used for treatment of pre-symptomatic COVID-19 patients and is undergoing clinical trials. Vitamins. Vitamin C. Supplementation with micronutrients, including vitamin C, has been suggested as part of the supportive management of COVID-19, as levels of vitamin C in serum and leukocytes are depleted in the acute stage of infection owing to increased metabolic demands. The use of high-dose intravenous vitamin C has been studied. According to clinical trials, there are at least 34 ongoing clinical trials including vitamin C, which have completed or are recruiting people hospitalized and severely ill with COVID-19. Vitamin D. During the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been interest in vitamin D status and supplements given the significant overlap in the risk factors for severe COVID-19 and vitamin D deficiency. These include obesity, older age, and Black or Asian ethnic origin, and it is notable that vitamin D deficiency is particularly common within these groups. The National Institutes of Health NIH COVID-19 treatment guidelines stated in July 2020 that there are insufficient data to recommend either for or against the use of vitamin D for the prevention of the general recommendation to consider taking vitamin D supplements, particularly given the levels of vitamin D deficiency in Western populations, has been repeated. As of February 2021, the English National Institute for Health and Care Excellence NICE continued to recommend small doses of supplementary vitamin D for people with little exposure to sunshine, but recommended that practitioners should not offer a vitamin D supplement solely to prevent or treat COVID-19, except as part of a clinical trial. Multiple studies have reported links between pre-existing vitamin D deficiency and the severity of the disease. Several systematic reviews and meta-analyses of these show that vitamin D deficiency may be associated with a higher probability of becoming infected with COVID-19 and have clearly demonstrated there are significant associations between deficiency and a greater severity of the disease, including relative increases in hospitalization and mortality. The quality of some of the studies included, and whether this demonstrates a causal relationship, has been questioned. Many clinical trials are underway or have been completed assessing the use of oral vitamin D and its metabolites, such as calcifediol, for prevention or treatment of COVID-19 infection, especially in people with vitamin D deficiency. The effects of oral vitamin D supplementation on the need for intensive care unit ICU admission and mortality in hospitalized COVID-19 patients has been the subject of a meta-analysis. A much lower ICU admission rate was found in patients who received vitamin D supplementation, which was only 36% of that seen in patients without supplementation p0.1. No significant effects on mortality were found in this meta-analysis. The certainty of these analyses is limited by the heterogeneity in the studies, which include both vitamin D3 cholecalciferol and calcifediol, but these findings indicate a potential role in improving COVID-19 severity, with more robust data being required to substantiate any effects on mortality. Calcifediol, which is 25-hydroxyvitamin D, is more quickly activated and has been used in several trials. Review of the published results suggests that calcifediol supplementation may have a protective effect on the risk of ICU admissions in COVID-19 patients. Others,